as human beings, inherently rhythmical. The first thing we hear in the third trimester when we're in the womb is a rhythm. It's the heartbeat, it's the mother's speech pattern, etc. So it's such a fundamental part of what makes us human, is this idea of rhythm. Well, certainly you mentioned that music has been the kind of anchor to everything that I've done, and this exploration into music and sound and what it's doing to our brain and body, why we love it so much. It has such an impact on us. This, flow state is the big sort of like driver towards this, where, for me as a DJ, this is the thing that I guess I'm addicted to, really. But it's trying to strive for that optimal state of being where essentially you're in that moment, time elapsed, you're not thinking about anything else, and you're just going with the emotions. I was going, wow, this is really impactful, right? It's really taken me to this really deep place, this really kind of meditative kind of space. And I thought, wow, this just with all my music experience, my sound design experience, I was like, well, what is actually happening here? So music has always been a thing. It's very kind of fundamental to humans. Like, I think as human beings, we haven't evolved necessarily far enough to exist in these kind of cities and these built up environments, these noisy spaces that we've kind of created for ourselves.
Brian D'Souza, founder and CEO of Swell Studio, plus sound artist and global DJ.
Sound is 50% of the film experience, but we never think of going to hear a film, right? It's like we go to see a film and then the sound is there, but the sound is so crucial. And music essentially is almost like a utility. It's on tap, It's like you turn it on your tap, it's like you pay your Spotify bill, like you pay your water bill. Whereas now we're in skip culture, where you listen to, maybe skip through an album, find your favorite song, listen to that a few times, then you're on to the next thing. So the shelf life of music is a lot shorter. What's actually probably being lost a little bit is this idea of just listening for listening's sake, this idea of being active. I mean, you get it in a club to a certain extent, in a live music performance, because you're there and you can be completely tuned into the experience.
You shared something off camera previously, which was more around some of a project you're working on with like psychedelic treatment as well. What's been your contribution to that from a sound perspective?
I think that
Brian, welcome to The Experienced Designers.
Thank you very much for having me.
Amazing. No, thank you very much for having us here today. So we're in your humble abode, in your studio in London. So privileged to be here, and looking forward to diving in and really just unpacking the work you're doing, and just learn a little bit more about your journey to where you are today. These things always make sense when you look back, don't they, in terms of your life? So I'd love to delve a little bit more into that, or maybe not. Who knows? So look, let's just open up. Like, just tell us a little bit about your background, or those early formative days with like music. Like, where did it kind of stem from? What was some of the influences to that? Where's some of if you just reflect back now on some of those foundational moments as Brian D'Souza.
Well, certainly you mentioned that music has been the kind of anchor to everything that I've done, and this exploration into music and sound and what it's doing to our brain and body, why we love it so much, or why we hate it, and it has such an impact on us. And my interest, I guess, stemmed from just an interest in music as a kind of gateway to exploration of the world, gateway into different cultures. I, remember like early experiences of listening to music, and that was the music that was played in my house when I was growing up, my parents' selection and stuff. But and then with my friends as a young person, as a teenager, and quite quickly I sort of started to develop this taste, this curiosity in terms of like, okay, this is the music I'm hearing now, but there's all this other stuff that seems to be out there. How do I get access to that, and how do I explore that? And so, Radio 1 at the time, and John Peel in particular, was one of the routes for me to kind of like access all this like amazing music that was just coming out from all around the world. And I would listen to his show late at night with a little notepad. This was pre-internet days, and I would write down all the track lists that all the tracks he would play, and then I would go to my local record shop at the weekend with my pocket money, and I would be like, okay, let's go and try and track down all these releases. And so that gave me quite a wide range, because obviously, he was famous for like his eclectic taste in music. And I quickly then started to amass this kind of like music collection that then, I guess, started life as CDs. This was obviously internet, so no streaming, no MP3s or anything like that. It was CDs, some tapes as well. But then I quickly kind of understood, or started to understand, that like vinyl was really the format that I needed to kind of like invest into, because like the best stuff was seemingly sometimes only on vinyl. And I was going to the record shop and they were like directing me to the vinyl aisle and stuff. So I borrowed my dad's turntable, and I, therefore inherited some of his music collection. So that was great, and I still have some of his records to this day. I mean, Miles Davis' Bitches Brew was like a big formative album for me, and like just loads of the classics, Motown, soul music, some classical, a couple of things from my mum's heritage as well. She's born in Kenya, but originally from Goa, so there was some Kenyan choral music as well. So I started to get access into that, and having had one turntable, and then this was kind of like towards the end of my schooling, DJ culture seemed to kind of come onto my radar. And it was initially kind of what interested me was the scratch DJ culture, hip hop music in particular. And so I wanted to kind of scratch. So I thought, I have to get another turntable. So I got another turntable and then started to buy more hip hop records and started to try and learn how to scratch, which immediately I found almost impossible to do. I was like, wow, this is like a real skill that was pretty much out of reach. And I guess I just didn't really pursue that much further, because I kind of started to get into more dance music and stuff in Glasgow, where I was born and brought up. Very much house and techno kind of city, it's this industrial, this rawness that comes from this kind of like working class roots. And so therefore the obvious kind of music and seemingly the stuff that was played out in shops and clubs, and I wasn't going to clubs at that point, but the stuff that seemed to be on the radar was this kind of like house and techno scene. So I started to kind of like get involved with that.
And what era was that? What timeline?
So that was like late 90s.
Late 90s, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I started to go clubbing. I started to get into that sort of culture. I was DJing with my friends, and then I went to university, and we started to run parties and club nights and book live acts and things like that, and that kind of sparked. I guess that was my first foray into the music industry, as such. At the same time, when I went to university, my degree was in psychology, so I was really sort of interested in kind of trying to, how can I bring these two disciplines together, music and psychology, the psychology of music. And so that was my first foray into this kind of like exploration into like what music is doing to our brain and body, and to people, and why it has such a allure, such a power. And my earliest experiment I remember doing, which is a real kind of like, game changer for me, was first year uni. We were given the sort of carte blanche freedom to create our own psychological experiment. So I said, okay, let's do some with music. And it was with my little kind of cohort that I was with. And we got people in a room and we played them different types of music, fast, slow, repetitive, not so repetitive. And we got them to do this maze, this task that they had to kind of like focus on. And then we timed them to do the maze. And it was amazing, the results, because the times that people would take to complete the maze were completely different based on the different music conditions that we were playing. So the fastest completion times was the fast and repetitive music, and and the slowest times was, funnily enough, the slower music was produced slower times, but the actual slowest as a result was when there was no music at all, when it was just silence. And I deduced from that actually the silences, especially in that kind of like lab environment, was like very uncomfortable for people, and that was very distracting for them, and like sort of inhibited their attention for the task at hand. But that was my first kind of insight into kind of, I guess, this kind of principle of rhythmic entrainment. How we are all, as human beings, inherently rhythmical. The first thing we hear in the third trimester when we're in the womb is a rhythm. It's the heartbeat, it's the mother's speech pattern, etc. So it's such a fundamental part of what makes us human, is this idea of rhythm. And so rhythmic entrainment is just something that's kind of ingrained into us. We hear a beat, say it's in a restaurant, and we're going to tune time to that beat, and we're not going to know that we're doing that, but we just can't help it. So we can, and similar on the dance floor, obviously my experiences as a DJ, you'd be in a club and you could get everyone kind of like in this kind of, this resonating body where everyone is tuned in, to the same kind of like, same BPM, same rhythm. And at that time at university, I was having all this experience, just paying my way, really, like doing these bar gigs. And obviously with bar gigs, slightly different from a club, or maybe entirely different from a club, where club, because of the volume, the amplitude of the music, and just the nature of the experience, is like that's the primary thing, right? So you're in there and you're dancing, and the music is the first thing. But in a restaurant, obviously you're there to socialize, you're there to eat, you're there to drink if it's in a bar, and so therefore the music is very much on the background of the experience, but it's still having an impact. It's still on your subconscious. And if you, so my first hand kind of like experience with that was that if I'm playing a set that seems to create the right atmosphere for the room, then people are going to have a more enjoyable experience. They're going to stay longer, and we're going to have a busier bar right to the end. of the night. And if I do a really, really good set, I'll have a few people coming up and going, oh, what was that track? What was that track? So you can like push the music from the background into the fore if it's done in the right kind of way.
So like, you know, and we know that kind of, you know, DJs kind of orchestrate the level, the impact of the music, you know, developing these kind of journeys for the audience. I mean, just that from an experiment point of view, what did you learn from that to just be testing these different like sounds and ways of working? Like, what else did you kind of describe that to us, like standing there in front of potentially even thousands of people? Yeah, just to share a bit more.
I mean, I had all these different experiences. I mean, the thing I love about DJing, and I still DJ to this day, so I'm 25 years into this whole DJ thing. And the thing I love is every single performance set or whatever it is that one might do is entirely different. So the thing I learned quite quickly is never overly prepare. Never try and like predict like what songs or try and memorize like what songs work for our previous dance floor. They're not potentially going to work for this dance floor. It's always in the moment. And it's always this connection that you have with the audience and the environment and the surroundings. You know, that could be things like how, you know, the sound system performs and trying to play music that's more tuned to that. Could be the room acoustics and just the set and setting and stuff that the you know, the performance kind of dictates. But the crucial thing is it's this kind of two-way communication between you and the audience. So you play a track and you're visually you know, monitoring like what the audience reaction is.
Yeah.
And you're trying to communicate to them and tell the story, but you got to make these judgment calls like every second of the way to say like, okay, I'm making this judgment that I'm going to start with this type of music because that's going to be the thing that's going to be appreciated most and kind of welcome everyone in and kind of like not alienate it too much. But then I want to try and challenge them and I want to bring them on this journey where we're going to have this kind of like shared experience and we're going to try and reach this kind of like optimal state of transcendence, you know, if you want to be grandiose with it. But like this, you know, flow state is the big sort of like driver towards this where, you know, for me as a DJ, this is the thing that I guess I'm addicted to really, but it's trying to strive for that optimal state of being where essentially you're in that moment, time elapsed, you're not thinking about anything else and you're just going with the motions. And I think that for my psychology degree, that was also something that I was studying. You know, Mahai came up with the studio flow, and it was very much about being this optimal state. And what the way he defines that is this kind of like sweet spot between the challenge, like, so, you know, human challenge, you know, personal challenge that you present itself. That could be a skill that you're trying to learn, like it could be mixing records or it could be playing an instrument, whatever it is. It could be anything, you know, it could be gardening or something. But then it's kind of like meeting, like, you spend your 10,000 hours and you're a proper pro at it, you're good. And then delivering that in the moment to that audience and connecting with that audience or that experience in that kind of way.
Yeah.
And so, you know, if you get that right, you know, you can achieve that flow state that I think is like such a crucial, you know, moment of human flourishing and like something that, you know, we should all try and strive for in our own kind of like way with our own different disciplines that we kind of like have invested into.
Absolutely. You talk a lot. I mean, you've mentioned previously in some interviews and things that you do as around active listening, and I'm just curious to kind of get your take on like in today's world with people not actively listening as much, or perhaps, you know, we're not as living as conscious perhaps as we should. And also, I think there's something about sound and music, period, in terms of how people value it or even appreciate it or even understand it. Because obviously, you know, your lens is very specific in the world from a musical perspective. So what do you see in this? I mean, because obviously this has generated opportunities and businesses that you've gone out and created, which we'll definitely get onto. But what's your view on that in terms of this kind of more active listening and its opportunity? I think for even just say the average person out there, I don't want to say it like that, but you get my point. It's, you know, the people just walking on the street every day, going to work. I think you know, how we define music as a sort of general term has kind of evolved, right? And largely that's due to a few different factors. That could be like the format, you know. So we've gone from, as I mentioned before, you know, vinyl, you know, to tapes, to CDs, to now streaming, and it's like music essentially is almost like a utility. It's on tap, you know, through Spotify, YouTube, or whatever. We've got these means of just turning it on. It's like you're turning on your tap. It's like you pay your Spotify bill, like you pay your water bill. Yeah. And it's always available. And so then music becomes this kind of ubiquitous thing that
you have to invest less into, and previously, I don't even want to know how much money I've invested into, from a financial point of view, but certainly from a time perspective as well, that whole kind of like going to a record shop, spending my pocket money when I was a teenager, and then just continuing that kind of like idea of like, you're creating these kind of narratives between yourself and this music, and you've kind of much more kind of like active in that process, let's say. Now it's just like, well, you can get everything instantaneously like that. And like the issue with that, I think, is that you've got too much choice, right? And it's the tyranny of that people might find challenging. And then therefore the algorithm sort of comes in, and we essentially just, it takes over. So we
kind of stop, we've stopped digging.
We stopped digging, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what I see is like this kind of huge long tail now in music, but there must be so much goodness in that long tail, which historically used to go to a record store and dig and find those records.
Yeah.
I mean, I know you can do it on Spotify and just search, but there's so much more volume.
Well, the interesting thing, I mean, there is more volume, and there's obviously the tools and technologies that maintain the kind of quality of the release. So there's a kind of whole kind of thing around like, is it good enough? And yes, a lot of the times the music is good enough, but does it say something original and unique? Is it, can it be valued in 5 years' time or whatever? Like, the jury's out. It's obviously subjective, and there's music for everyone now. And I don't begrudge the whole fact that like we're now moving into much more of a creator economy where it comes to like the everyday person. I mean, such as myself, I'm not really kind of musically trained, and I've had access to technologies that allow me to kind of like create my own musical songs and compositions that, serve my purpose and help my creativity kind of come to the fore. So that's a great thing, ultimately. I think when it comes to, back to your question around active, and I guess the antonym of that is passive, a lot of our musical experiences are now passive. Like just turn your Spotify on and it's like, what is the best music for me to cook to, or to work out to, or to do some activity to? And it's an accompanying soundtrack to those activities that we do as the primary kind of like thing. And if we get that right, it's going to make those activities more pleasurable, or working out more effective, or whatever. And there's all this sort of science and psychology around that, around the functional kind of value of music, which is really kind of great, and that's all very worthwhile. But what's actually probably being lost a little bit is this idea of just listening for listening's sake. This idea of being active. I mean, you get it, as I mentioned, in a club to a certain extent, in a live music performance, because you're there and you can be completely tuned into the experience, But a lot of the time, like, when is the last time that anyone's sat down at home and put an album on and just sat and listened to it for its entirety? Whereas I remember doing that so much through my childhood. Like, I'm going to finish my story around like going and spending my pocket money in the record shops with my John Peel list, and I would come home and I would have the CD, and it was like brilliant. I'd play that start to finish, and I'd play it again, and I would go through each track, and I would look at the liner notes, and I'd spend the whole afternoon with one CD, and probably the whole week until I bought the next one. So you would invest much more time. Whereas now we're in skip culture, where you listen to, maybe, skip through an album, find a favorite song, listen to that a few times, and you're on to the next thing. So the shelf life of music is a lot shorter. So I think there's value, and this is where it comes into a lot more of the kind of, I guess, a more philosophical approach. Whereas like, if we can be more active in our experiences just in general, in a kind of mindful kind of sense, then we can perhaps have a much richer kind of like experience where we're in the moment and we can appreciate that moment for what it is.
And I've noticed there's been an uptick in like listening cafes, right, with shelves of records, and it's dedicated specifically to just come and have a coffee and listen to music. So I've seen, in Japan there's an amazing one that's really beautifully designed. So more of that, please. I think. Yeah,
I think that thing comes from Japan, that listening cafe. But I think that it's again, there's a balance here, like where, like, unfortunately, the economics kind of have to rule the roost sometimes. So you kind of go in and it's amazing speaker setup, and they've obviously invested a lot, but then there's all this kind of noise from, servers kind of serving food and people clinking cutlery and everything else that might detract from that purity of the listening experience. I mean, I had a great experience in a new listening bar called Space Talk, which celebrated its first birthday, which is in London, in East London. And they've just done it right, I think. Like, they still can have the people in the space, but they've got enough space in there that it's very private.
Yeah.
Like each of the different booths and different seating kind of arrangements they've done is like allows people to, they can talk, they can drink, they can have a nice social time, but the music is definitely at the fore. And like that was the the first. I've never been to the ones in Japan where it's a bit more militant, I believe, like where if you're talking, you're kind of like told to shut up. It's very, very quiet and things. Maybe you even take your shoes off in the door or whatever. But like that kind of thing sounds kind of beautiful. Obviously, you don't want to be policed, overly policed, but like, yes, sometimes you have to protect the sanctity of this experience.
So tell us about this kind of moving kind of or building on the DJing lifestyle, and obviously then evolving I guess how you're bringing sound to the world in different ways and experimenting, and this kind of convergence between the psychology element and the music. What was next on that kind of journey for you in terms of how you started experimenting and working on it?
Yeah, so I did that experiment I mentioned, which was like, showing this kind of idea of rhythmic entrainment or whatever. And then I went on after my psychology degree. I did a few other things, in the kind of music and psychology space within the degree. And then I went on to do a master's in sound design. And that allowed me to kind of like spend some time studying sound and film. So all these directors saying sound is 50% of the film experience, but we never think of going to hear a film, right? It's like we go to see a film and then the sound is there, but the sound is so crucial. I mean, 50% or even more in some directors like kind of perspective. So that was kind of interesting, and then a lot of stuff around acoustics, and then with my kind of like previous hat on, it was like the restaurant acoustics, and like I did the study in this restaurant for my dissertation where we would this kind of notion of speech intelligibility. So it's like, what is the speech intelligibility? Like if I'm sitting a meter away from you in a restaurant, can we have a conversation at a normal level? And like there's so many cases that just wasn't even possible. So, and it's just incredible that obviously you're there to obviously have food, but then talk to your friends, like your partner or whatever, like across a table. I mean, it's not like we're just shouting distances, but we're ended up yelling at each other. And it's like, why is that a thing that we're not considering in the design of these spaces? Like what is happening here? Where's that roadblock? And why is sound not in there? And it's just, I guess it's similar to films, although that's maybe not spoken about in the film industry. It's definitely something that is absolutely acknowledged, that they got to treat sound with respect. We've got to invest in the audio soundtrack and all the kind of like other aspects of the sound design of a film. Like, why is sound design or music design in a restaurant not like a thing? Like, it just wasn't. And especially, I'm talking back, I think there's been a slow kind of like improvement perhaps, but I still see like massive kind of, there's all these kind of places that are not really attending to that.
We should be getting Hans Zimmer's quality, like restaurant sound experience, like intentionality around it.
Yeah, for sure.
That's what differentiates him though, because of his craft, and he's a true artist in the form. And the way he brings new sounds, I think in the Dune movie, he was like creating sounds that just hadn't existed before in order to fit the movie or to bring it to life. I mean, it's just that level, that 1% in terms of that skill. So how did you then kind of continue to evolve that from a business perspective?
Well, I finished university and I had all these kind of like skills that didn't necessarily kind of like lead into a job that I could find, at least. I mean, I was DJing, but that wasn't really paying the bills. And that seemed like more of a hobby at the time. So I set up this little business called Open Ear, and it was based on this premise that I mentioned before. Is like our ears are always open, they're always receiving sound information, and that sound information is being processed in the brain and doing different things in terms of how it affects our behavior, but we're not really maybe thinking about it. So we're going to call this company Open Ear. And essentially it's going to be working on a business to business level with different brands, and this is leisure, retail, shops, bars, cafes, etc., hospitality. And we're going to start having these conversations with how they're playing music, what could be better, like in terms of the curation, in terms of the delivery and everything else. And I would go around all these places where I was in Glasgow and I'd be like, well, you're playing music. Like, why are you playing this music? And no one could give me an answer like why they're playing the music. It's like usually just something that we've all just decided to do. It's just like, but literally everywhere was playing it. And that obviously continues today. I mean, music is ubiquitous in every single kind of like, commercial space, really. I was thinking, like, why is no one really thinking about this? Because my first-hand experiences, this is changing people's behaviors. That was my academic experience. My first-hand experience when I was DJing was, if I'm playing this right, then people are going to stay longer and they're going to spend more money. Do people not want to make more money It just seems crazy that there's a missed opportunity. So Open Ear was a kind of like, a business that I set up to have these conversations. We built this platform. It was kind of I guess you could frame it like a kind of like Spotify, but for business. This is before Spotify existed. So it was a bit of software that turned into a web-based platform that turned into kind of like an app-based platform that allowed, the delivery of a lot of music content curated for the brand. And I worked with lots of different music curators that came onto the team. So it was handpicked by humans that with a craft, Hans Zimmer's like, level, I would say, to my own team. And then, delivered via the bit of software where you could schedule different music for different times of day. We built these tools that will allow people to really kind of harness that power of music in the kind of real-time environment, like, busy bustling restaurant or whatever. We created this kind of app that had an energy slider on it. So you could, as a bar manager, be there and you could be like, right, not a DJ, but they could play the DJ because they'd be like, right, all of a sudden I've got this big booking coming in and I want to liven up the atmosphere. Let's whack the energy slider up. Nice. At the end of the day, we don't want to be playing really up-tempo music. We want to keep everyone there a bit longer. We slow everyone down, so we're going to reduce the energy on the energy slider.
Were there any other parameters in there as well, in terms of...
I mean, we talked about a lot of different things. I mean, volume was a thing, and that was really hard to police. I mean, we talked about like putting microphones, and there's companies out there that do that now, where the volume levels are kind of regulated based on the kind of like the overarching sound input, which is kind of cool. And then, having the ability to be really in the moment. So there's a lot of kind of like moments where, I don't know, some kind of cultural event has happened, something that is like people are talking about it, and you want to be able to deliver like the musical experience to relate to that. So that could be, the Christmas is obvious. I mean, that's like the thing that runs around every year. But that was such a big thing, is like Christmas playlists and bringing that in. But more interestingly, I think like what we were always striving to do was like kind of say if someone, a classic musician kind of died. I remember like Bowie or Prince, whatever, like passed away, and everyone was talking about it. Everyone obviously, or most people love like their music and who they are. So we were immediately like playing like lots of Prince and Bowie or whatever in the playlists. So you go to these places and immediately it's a mark of respect to these and time-honored artists, and it just shows to the customers, even if it is just subconscious, that the brand is really kind of like talking their language, talking to them, having this kind of communication with their audience, and really kind of like a living, breathing kind of entity.
It's keeping them like really attuned to the kind of the micro events that happen, just ad hoc in society. That's cool. Very cool. How did that, what was your kind of evolution for, maybe not evolution, but what was some of like your like light bulb moments in there in terms of that experience, like designing that? What were some of the learnings that you took in terms of continued experimentation, testing these different environments, creating this amazing tool? What was some of the reflections that you've had from that?
I mean, there was an early one. We worked with this chain of gastropubs just in the outside London, the kind of commuter belt, and it was a gastropub, so they had a bar area, they had a restaurant area, and they were playing fairly generic pop music before we came in. They were like, right, we want to try and do something that's a little bit more on brand. So we kind of create these playlists, and we said to them, right, okay, what's the target here? Is it the bar, is it the restaurant, like what, times of day, etc. And they were like, well, let's focus, try and get the restaurant atmosphere going, try and keep diners longer. So we made a playlist much more, I guess, kind of classic, a lot of soul, a lot of funk music or whatever, like much more of the dining kind of experience rather than the bar. And their initial response to having then played it and seen the reaction to their audience was they were a bit worried, because they were like, oh, the bar seems like quieter or whatever. And, we're not sure how this is going to like really play out. And this doesn't feel like necessarily like this is going to work. But then when they looked at the till receipts, they were like, oh, hang on a minute. Like there's more people in the restaurant area. They're staying for longer. They're getting a dessert. They're maybe buying a more expensive bottle of wine. And actually, like with the bar, that was like our, late teen, early 20s kind of audience that are buying cheaper alcoholic beverages at the bar. So we're not getting like as much of a return, but we're easily making up for that, and more so in the restaurant kind of sales. So that was like a set their kind of musical identity for the next 10 years, like that we worked with. It was always like, let's go back to this study and let's think about like how this might be like even counterintuitive to begin with, And we certainly had some over the years, like manager pushback and say, no, we're going to get it more like popular or whatever. But I was like, well, like, just look at this and like, let's think about this. Yeah. So that was something that we always kind of like, went back to. And I know this podcast is obviously interested in office environments. And so one of our big clients, I don't know if we mentioned clients, but the office group has turned into Foros, like big London, I think number 2 after WeWork or whatever it became. But they approached us, and at that time they didn't play any music in the office. And they'd had 5 sites. I think they're up to like 50 plus or maybe even more like now or whatever. But so there was a young brand, and they were trying to create this brand for themselves, but also this kind of atmosphere in terms of it was conducive to co-work and creating a nice environment for people trying to work there. And some of the things they were saying to us was, okay, so we're creating these nice environments. We've got this amazing furniture. We've got these, all these kind of like amenities for everyone, but we've got these open plan spaces as such, obviously typical. And what we're noticing is if someone has a work phone call or wants to do like a one-to-one meeting or whatever that's essentially private, they're going to the vestibule, they're going out to the local cafe, and they're not actually using the office for what it was. And it's because of this sound, this idea of speech intelligibility. Their speech intelligibility was so good, they were so self-conscious that they were like trying to...
I think others all
hear. And everyone else is just eavesdropping, even if they're not. And so it was really kind of counter what should be like the optimal kind of workspace environment. So they were actually looking at, and they'd looked at the kind of research around white noise, pink noise, different kind of like types of just noise that I think it's more popular in American offices, but you could just pump in like a sound generator that plays like this ambient noise. And just, on the basics of that, the overall noise level and the property will go up, but the speech intelligibility will then go down because like it's being masked. The sound masking idea, it's being masked by this ambient noise. And I said to him, well, you can achieve that through music, and that's probably going to help you also communicate a certain story through your, the brand messaging. It's also going to help us shape potentially like the day as it progresses, and the week as that progresses as well, which is going to create the right environment.
As well, you'll see it's winter. It could be different soundscapes for winter versus summer.
Well, and as it turned out to be, and that, and it's also just like a lot more human to have music being played now. But I appreciate the music shouldn't be distracting. It's not going to be like pop music that you hear on the radio, because you want people to be able to work, and the nature of pop music, it's going to be distracting. It's going to grab your attention. I mean, that's what pop music is. By definition, it's going to be like there and popping, and it's that earworm that gets stuck in your head. So it's not necessarily that. So we're going to go on this journey to figure out like what is actually the right stuff that's going to be conducive to the workplace environment, achieve that functional sound masking kind of quality. But also kind of speak to your brand and your brand values and communicate what you need to do to as your brand kind of grows, as they subsequently did. So we questionnared like all the members at the time prior to kind of going in. And the first question is, would you like music or not? So we really kind of like put our head in the chopping block.
Yes,
then.
No.
I was like, right, we're going to lose this deal. No. Luckily we got like, I don't know, 60%, 70%. It was like, yes. And that then enabled us to sort of win the deal. And, there was some commonalities in terms of the kind of general flow, like of energy, I guess, throughout the day with what people are looking to get from their music. Very difficult thing to talk to people. It's another one of my learnings, about music with this kind of functional hat on, because based on like however much experience or knowledge or whatever the time they've invested in their own kind of musical journey, they will either kind of have some intuition around that, or they just won't at all. Like it'll just be like, no, I just want to hear what I like in my playlist or whatever. And it's like, I can't really think outside that box because that's music to me. It's that box. So, there's been certain conversations that have been sort of slightly challenging to try and, just posit this notion that like music it can do so many different things at one time. One of those things, especially with a business hat on, is this kind of idea of like being functional for whatever that business purpose is at that time. And it's not just about your individual taste as well. But we're going to try and, speak to that a little bit, right? But, it's not just about you and your individual taste. So that can be a challenge, but it is what it is, and ultimately the proof is in the pudding. If people are overall are enjoy, the thing is, you're never going to enjoy it per se. It's going to be like you feel more comfortable, and you feel more like if there's less people going to spend money in the local coffee shop because they can have the meetings in the office, right?
Yeah, and there's also like there's a lot of things happening unconsciously as well. I mean, just which we definitely get onto. So, can I just like to so now where from a sound perspective in that kind of evolution towards like the well-being realm, what's been your because you've got so many elements that I feel that you've been pulling on different like experiences and education to really kind of get into this kind of focus around well-being, and obviously this is a growing area for sure. Just well-being industry period, and I think sound is a big component of that, of course. So how do you see the industry right now? Let's start maybe there. What are you seeing out there? What's maybe from a maturity, or are there kind of emerging angles or channels that are emerging?
I think well-being, wellness, that kind of whole industry, which is multi-billion-dollar industry now. I mean, it's absolutely huge. But there's been with my experience, there's been a pivot, there's been a transition that's kind of gone from, I guess when I'm talking about this is like from more like the hotel spa kind of audience type of business, right? Because that was the natural progression for me, having run this open ear business. And we're dealing with hospitality, we're dealing with hotels, we're dealing with bars and restaurants and shops, but hotels in particular that would have the spa, but the spa was like a kind of almost like an afterthought all the time. Yeah. And it wasn't the main revenue driver, right? And so therefore it was just a thing in the basement that, some people would go to, but, largely speaking, it was not really a major kind of part of like what the hotel would offer. That is changing. I think that people now, and it seems obvious now when you think about it, like why wouldn't you want to go to a spa when you're at a hotel? That whole well-being, massage, whatever, swim, everything else around health. Of course, but that wasn't culturally where we were at like 5, 10, 15 years ago. It just wasn't, so that's been an opportunity, I think, for the hotel industry that have had a spa to invest more into that. I think there's been a transition with the kind of well-being industry where it's been like much more about beauty and sort of pampered beauty, luxury, etc., into like actually this can be a real kind of vehicle for positive health impact and benefit.
Transformational, yeah.
Absolutely. So that kind of recognition and that learning curve that needed to have gone on to achieve the kind of like the knowledge and understanding. And I think that, like the industry is still in that journey as far as I can tell. I mean, talking very broad brushstrokes here, but like, there's certainly like a lot of kind of like, pseudoscience versus science to kind of cut through, and like, how do you, what do you anchor yourself to? It's a lot of new startups, in the space selling, these wonder products that like, may or may not have a scientific basis, may or not be proven, may or may not be effective. It's one of those things that there's a kind of bit of an arms race at the moment. But there's also some really amazing things. And ultimately, like, I think it's a recognition that the culture has right now around like health and the kind of importance of health and well-being has been paramount to, everything that we're doing and achieving as human beings. So that ultimately is a good thing. So I guess my pivot was the fact that I was working with these hotels that had a spa and really thought about the spa. We were doing their playlist, but it wasn't much, like, it was really just like the last thing on the brief. And then they started to talk more about that. And I had this interest. I guess I'd kind of like done 10 years of DJing, and I was sort of running this open ear business. That was my day job. And then my night job was the DJing stuff. So it was like full on. And, I became relatively successful. I was literally playing like every weekend. I would jet out like most of Europe. I played all over the world. So I was having this sort of dual life, which for a lot of times I was trying to give up one side, but I just couldn't, because the open ear had started to establish itself, and that'd been like 5, 6, 7 years for it to really kind of get going. Then it was going to get going, building the team. We'd moved to London at that point, so it was like an office down here, and like we got up to about 20 staff at the peak. And then, but the DJing stuff was cool. I released like 4 albums. I was getting asked to play in random places like Cuba and Kenya and like all over the world. So I couldn't give that up. I mean, those are life experiences and opportunities. That's good. So being, the place I was in my life, no kids or anything like that. It was just like, let's just go for it. So, but it was tiring. And coming up to, we're now like 2019 going into 2020, like I was kind of almost like burning out in that period. And I had a kid in 2019. So that was also like another variable that meant that I just got to really relook at the things. So when COVID came along, I was like, oh, perfect. I'm actually like, I need to have a lockdown and I need to step off of this kind of like DJ thing where I'm jetting out, and I need to spend more time at home. And I'd signed up prior to COVID, I'd signed up to train in sound therapy. So with the British Academy of Sound Therapy, so this is, the gong bath, the sound bath, the practitioner in terms of like that, the sound healer. And I had, mainly it was, I didn't really want to be a sound therapist per se, but I was interested in the understanding like what is actually going on, because I've been going to these sound baths in London. They seem to be popping up everywhere. I was going, wow, this is really impactful, right? And it's really taken me to this really deep place, this really kind of meditative kind of space. And I thought, wow, this is just with all my music experience, my sound design experience, I was like, well, what is actually happening here? Because it is a powerful thing, I think. And so I just...
And can I just ask, like, what was some of the elements or the modules within that course? Was it just to share a little bit of like...
Yeah. So, I mean,
explore.
What I liked about the course, and I researched a few different courses, but they seem to have a methodology that was based on the kind of burgeoning science that was out there. There was some kind of thought process into it. It wasn't just as some of the practitioners do, it's much more free flowing. It's feeling the sound. It's like, playing in lots of different ways. They were like, no, this is our tried and tested methodology in terms of how we're going to use these principles that are based on some of the principles that I already knew. I mentioned rhythmic entrainment. That was the first thing, right? It was like, I'm going to play this gong with this heartbeat rhythm, and our body is going to entrain itself to that heartbeat. And then if I slow down my playing, we're going to slow down the body. We're going to slow down our heartbeat. We're going to slow down our nervous system. And so simple things like that seem obvious, but it was like, okay, right, this makes perfect sense from a kind of like science kind of perspective. So there was things like that. And then there was other things in terms of you can just borrow from like just general music composition. It was the use of kind of intervals. So you might use like these singing bowls, and that might be, a singing bowl that's tuned to a C, and then another singing bowl that's tuned to a G, and that's like the perfect fifth kind of interval. And that's generally in music composition like known as a very pleasant, uplifting kind of like combination of different frequencies. And similarly, like what was interesting actually was then understanding like the therapy side of this. And that was when you kind of had a sort of push and pull between the consonants, so this perfect fifth, for example, and dissonance, which was much more kind of like maybe more discordant, difficult to kind of like for us to hear. So the tritone would be an example of that, which, the classic thing with that was it was known as the devil's tone. It was like this combination of frequency that like just was actually banned at some stages of the Catholic Church, like back in the day, because it was like evoking the devil, because it was so discordant, and it would do these things to our nervous system in that kind of way. But the idea was that if you've had a trauma and you need therapy to help, then being in this kind of this meditative state that the sound therapy sound bath allows you to perhaps achieve, and it's obviously not going to work for everyone. So, but that's the intention, is that we'll train your heartbeat, we'll lower that, we'll put you in a relaxed state, we'll envelop you with all these kind of like very rich harmonic kind of spectrum of sound. The bathing you in this kind of like sound, and the room acoustics and everything. So the sound becomes like completely all around you. You're immersed in the sound. And once you're in that kind of almost like held space, like then you're most likely to move from maybe a beta brainwave state into an alpha theta brainwave state, which is where you're kind of like more susceptible to objective thought, to more creative thoughts, etc. And you can really help to process things in a different way.
Yeah.
And I guess this goes back to the kind of idea that we're talking about with active listening, which is that if you can achieve that kind of level, and is through kind of like focus and attention and almost like through the meditative lens, then we can help to kind of really gain more insight into like our perspective on life, like our place within that, the interconnectedness of everything, and living things in our environments, etc. And
is that kind of take it on theta from memory serves right? That's kind of almost at that point between conscious and subconscious, kind of really taking people down into that point.
Yeah, it's where we're almost in sleep state, or like where we're dreaming essentially. So you're awake but dreaming and stuff. So delta would be the the state lower than that, and that's sleep.
And of course, from a therapeutic point of view, there's lots of opportunities here.
Yeah, and it's this kind of idea of ego death, so the I becomes like less of a pressing kind of thing. You know, this default mode network that drives our every day is less in charge of like how we're operating. So we're able to become much more at one. You know, this kind of idea of like oneness and oceanic boundlessness and all these kind of terms that sound therapy might kind of yeah, which is great, and for me, it was like, okay, I get this, like, because with my DJ hat on, I'm doing like almost the same thing, but in the opposite way, right? The DJ thing is building you up to a state of euphoria, but also like a trance-like state, you know, the state of flow that I was talking about.
Yes.
But the sound therapy is bringing you down and also helping you achieve this kind of like this flow state where, you know, time just becomes, you know, your timekeeping messages that can fade away and you're in that kind of moment. And then, as I was saying, the mix and match between consonance and dissonance helps to then trigger thoughts, memories, neurons to fire in different ways for you to then maybe confront, if it is a trauma that you're suffering from, that trauma in this held space that then you can process in maybe a slightly different way. And then you can, you know, after an hour, whatever, the sound therapist will bring you back out at the other side, and you know, you may just feel relaxed, but you may also have gained like really kind of crucial insight.
Absolutely.
You know,
so how has this work evolved? How has your work in this and your obviously there's we'd love to maybe Swell we can dive into, but just like how are you diving into this more? And I love that, by the way. I think it's really interesting from taking people on a high in a club to now going completely the other way. It's like Puppet Master. But it's a fascinating one because it's still grounded in this intentionality of sound, right? And in different forms. I love that you've kind of like, you've decided to kind of just to be curious and like look at how can we play with this in different ways and experiment. So
I think like you know, I mentioned definitions before, and how we define music has largely been, I think, in this kind of cultural moment, is about entertainment, right? And it's this commoditization of music. It's the song, it's the artist, it's the cultural movement or the genre, whatever that they represent. You know, it's everything buying into that individual and the music that they create. And it's entertainment, it's them on a stage, right? But if you look at the kind of like music on a much more kind of like zoomed out macro level, you're like, well, music has existed since the earliest, you know, days of Homo sapiens like running around the earth, and they've bone flutes or whatever back then. So music has always been a thing. It's very kind of fundamental to humans, like I mentioned rhythm before. And for millennia, like it existed as this functional sort of tool, you know, for ceremonies, for communication across tribes, for like war, for healing, for lullabies, for all these different functional kind of like purposes. But it's just kind of like evolved now into this box of like, you know, of entertainment. And the music industry is there supporting that kind of notion of music as entertainment. So if you just zoom out a little bit and you kind of redefine, I think, what music is, and you strip away some of the kind of the industrialization of it and the cultural kind of component, then you're back to the bare bones of like music is this kind of like functional tool that affects our nervous system, our brain and body in different ways. So I guess like for me, having then studied in sound therapy, I had the opportunity to sail on. Open Ear basically got acquired and just after the sort of COVID period by a big sort of background music company. And that was the perfect timing for me because it allowed me to then focus on this new startup that I'd sort of been, you know, getting off the ground called Swell Studio. And the idea with Swell was just to really kind of focus in on projects that would kind of have this intersection of like sound and health in general. And a lot of the projects we do are based on nature and listening to the sounds of nature and trying to bring in or be influenced by or inspired by nature. A lot of the principles that underpin like what we deliver is based on these kind of sound therapy principles that I mentioned, you know, like how we can break music or soundscapes down into their constituent parts and rebuild them in terms of this functional aspect that can affect the nervous system or brain and body in different ways. And then deliver them through sort of technology. So we're developing like apps and trying to make them as kind of like inclusive as possible. Just, you know, to have an app on your phone or whatever is great. Like we initially tried to just replicate sound therapy, a sound bath in a headphone listening experience, but it doesn't, you know, from our testing, it didn't really work because you need the sound therapist the human being actually there. They carry great weight in this whole experience. Like they need the held space, you need the set and setting, you need this whole kind of like room acoustics thing, you need the instruments to be live. So that's fine, and I'm glad of that, because that should exist, and that does serve a purpose that seems it will benefit a lot of people. Whereas what we're doing is like much more like focusing on like how we can bring in sounds of nature, deep listening in a forest bathing, all these kind of principles around the benefits of listening, to nature, and then deliver these things with the kind of like the sort of sound therapy, but also music hat on.
And I mean, how would this kind of how would this work for like just people going about their day? Because, we're living, I don't know the percentages, but the population in urban environments is only going to be increasing. People are just super busy doing their day to day. I mean, I think, the nervous systems are all over the place. I think we need to figure out like ways of like these nano moments, right? Well, where can we ground and where can we find these things in our flow of life and bring more intentional or like, focus into maybe just, hey, I'm going to take this like, just this break or something, just to anchor into potentially a soundscape that will lower my stress levels or cause or whatever it is, just kind of just bring it down. Like is that a market? Is that something you see emerging or developing? Where do you see kind of the practicality elements of this kind of form?
I think you're right. Like, I think we're continuously in fight or flight, right? It's just high stress levels, got, time per lots of things on the to-do list. Like you're pushing and pulling in so many different directions. We're trying to get after it. I mean, it's crazy because, all these technologies that we as human beings have built, and obviously you get AI coming in, the theory would have been that like we're going to be working less, but it's just such a core part. I think it's like the human condition of like, we just have to kind of like work. And if there's not work available because we've solved it through a technology, we'll find other means of making, of spending our time doing something productive. So we need productivity is key. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Like having the ability to stop and process things is super, super important. And I think that, the obvious things that I always talk about with this, I mean, just from a personal perspective, the best ideas that I've ever had have been either in the shower, in the toilet, or on holiday, right? I mean, the idea for Open Ear as a business, like, was formed when I was interrailing around Europe, and it was just slowly gestating, and I was kind of like, I'm going to put this to paper. And I came back after that month-long trip, and I was like, boom, I'm there. There's a business plan right there. And similarly, like with lots of my music production and whatever, it's always been through this kind of lens of getting away from my everyday. A lot of the music I make is through these trips that I'm lucky enough to do in different countries, collaborating with just different musicians, and cultivating relationships just in sort of a serendipitous kind of manner, and then making music in that moment. And that's me at my kind of creative kind of like the high point. And I was reading the Rick Rubin book, you must have seen it, like, but it's like the purpose is not, the opening quote is like, it's the aim, the intention is not to be necessarily just creative, it's to create the environments that allow us to be kind of creative, or creative to just flow through us.
Yes.
Creativity to just be there as present. And it's like, I was thinking this myself, because this kind of very conscious of this stuff, but even me being conscious of this stuff, 99% of the time my working day is filled with just admin type related things, or whatever deadlines that I've got to fulfill, but not actually the essence of being creative. It's such a small part. So I guess, going into what we're doing with Swell is to try and create sound environments, and it's to be delivered in different ways that allow people the opportunity to just get away, I guess, from their everyday. And the clever thing I think we've developed with the Swell technology is the user, the listener, if there's the app user, the business or whatever, they're in charge of the duration of time of the experience. So you can have agency over that. Because I think going back to your original question, which is around active and passive listening means you press play on a Spotify playlist and it can run forever, right? And therefore, you're never going to be able to spend much time attending to that. It's just there. It's whatever. It's the background soundscape. But if you're saying, I've got 5 minutes, 3 minutes even, or 15 minutes, let's say, and you've made that decision, then your agency over that time is going to be, you're much more invested into that experience. We talked about investment in terms of music and financial, but this is investment of time that you might have. So allowing the listener to say, well, I'm going to listen to this thing. And then for that thing to deliver some sort of functional benefit, and also just allow them to escape. Maybe it's based on like with Swell, what we've done is create lots of different location-based listening experiences. So this is like locations that I've been to on my travels mostly. Eventually we'll get other people doing that as well. But it's places such as Japan, as India, as Cape Verde, as north of Scotland, the islands. I've had this whole kind of career in music of going around to these different places, interesting spots of natural beauty most of the time, and capturing that through audio, and I've stepped up my kind of like field recording and audio recording capture kind of game. And so creating these kind of like environments where you can kind of immediately kind of like transport yourself to there, and then bringing in through maybe sessions with other musicians or just sessions that I've done myself with musical elements that are programmed through the sort of sound therapy kind of like lens. So that's the idea with Swell. And I guess what we're working on right now is the business to business sort of app that's designed for like spas and health and wellbeing kind of like markets, where there's undoubtedly opportunities, and we have examples of projects we've done, such as like an accompaniment to a massage in a spa treatment room is one. So it's a kind of end-to-end experience, 60 minutes or whatever. It could be post the massage, so as a headphone listening experience, just to kind of like completely detach. We've got examples of working with sort of vibroacoustic furniture, where literally you're feeling the sound because the speakers in the chair, and that kind of going through the body as well as listening. And we at the moment have a project with a hotel brand that's in the bedrooms actually, so you can have the app, and there's different conditions. There's a sleep setting, there's a wake up setting, there's a kind of like escape to nature setting or whatever, and there's a creative inspiration, so they're working from there. So
romantic setting as well.
Oh. Yeah, that's a whole like dance and romantic. So there's 4 genres. This meta-analysis, is this healing songs, there's lullabies, so sleep songs, and then dance songs, and hang on, what did I say? The love songs, and so yeah, that's like the 4. So we're covering 2 of those, I think.
How are things like also evolving with I'll do that question again, 2 seconds. The question I want to ask was actually on the so what I also see with this as well is not like some of these apps like Headspace and stuff, we normally do like you sit down, you do a meditation or you do a breath work. What do you see in terms of just from just a soundscape moment as well? Like I think adding that in, because when you're sharing this, I think I love it. It sounds amazing. But I'm also like the way this is just me speaking, my experience is I normally sit down and do a meditation. That's my active intention, 15-minute, 30-minute, an hour, depending on my time. But I've never really thought about sitting down and just sitting with a soundscape exclusively for a period of time. What's some of the, say, differences in that, and what's some of maybe the science behind that in terms of soundscapes and some of the frequencies or elements that or some of the components of that and some of the health benefits?
I mean, I think you've pinpointed one of the major challenges that we have. I mean, one is that there's apps like Headspace out there. I mean, we're doing B2B stuff at the moment, right? But the intention would be to release a B2C product like with this, and that would be kind of in this app space of Headspace and Calm and all the rest of it. So that's a big challenge. And you're right, like having a guide that essentially tells you what to do, prompts you, that's going to be hugely, necessary for a lot of people, especially novices that are coming into this. So it's almost like, in some ways, like listening just to the soundscape is for the pro meditators who don't want the voice because they kind of know what to do. They know to focus on the breath or whatever, and they know how to get into that state, but they just want an environment, almost going back to what we're talking about, sound masking. They want an environment to kind of like, cocoon them in that, and they want to be able to set the time, to something as long as an hour or 2 hours or whatever, like a long form, so that maybe that helps them to keep some track of time, so the audio stopped and they're like, okay, this is done. There's elements to there's that. I'm not like kind of completely getting away from it. We could easily add like a kind of voice activation, but I think that what I'm interested in is the point of difference, where it is like, I mean, I know people, and don't know how big the market is, but the people that would just naturally be turned off by having someone, do a meditation, like I've found out with Headspace, I know they've put different voice actors in or whatever. It used to just be the founder, right? And then he added a female, and then he added a few more people and stuff. And it's like, okay, so you can pick and choose your preferred voice, which is important, because I find myself, like whatever, like you're going to be drawn to one maybe more than the other. So there's that kind of thing where, like, you know, perhaps you're just turned off fundamentally by having a guide tell you what to do. But hopefully the fact that we're all, to a certain degree, an expert in terms of listeners, right? Because we've been listening since before we were born, right? So we've been listening, and we intuitively know, like, how to listen, right? I mean, think about, like, just all the music that we, you know, absorb and stuff. Like, we've trained ourselves, like, very well in listening to music. We understand, body knows how to understand, like, how to, like, kind of you know, interpret emotions that are kind of evoked through the music. So the idea is that we just need to kind of like pivot that kind of like perspective into this kind of idea of intentional, active listening for that sort of period of time. It's easier said than done, like, absolutely, and that's one of the challenges.
Time and attention,
Time and attention,
currencies, aren't they? Yeah, I think it's an individual choice of, like, okay, I consciously want to. I know I want to. Or whatever the goal might be, like, I want to relax a bit more. I'm too stressed. I've got anxiety. I've got all these different challenges. You shared something off camera previously, which was more around some of the project you're working on with, like, psychedelic treatment as well. Just to share a little bit more about that, because it's really interesting. Obviously, there's a lot of research on psychedelics and psilocybin impacts for therapeutic and deep work around therapy. What's been your kind of contribution to that from a sound perspective?
I think that it's amazing how integral sound is to these kind of experiments and the research on psychedelic therapy. And, you know, probably people are aware of the history, but, you know, there was a burgeoning kind of like research field back in the 60s of psychedelics as a therapeutic treatment for depression and anxiety and other kind of disorders. But then, you know, through the war of drugs or whatever, the whole research, like, was just curtailed completely. Yeah. But it's in the last 10, 15 years that it started to come back, and the regulations have kind of like allowed, you know, some of this research to kind of like be rebirthed. And so Imperial College in London is one of the leading institutions that are kind of like researching, and you mentioned psilocybin, but they're also researching ketamine, MDMA, and other kind of psychedelics like DMT or whatever. And they have been finding like really fascinating, really kind of positive like results for the treatment of depression, and other conditions. There are, and the patients, it's important to say, that are undergoing these trials, you know, they're all kind of treatment resistant kind of points of their kind of like their journey. They've tried everything and they're still suffering, and it's really debilitating. So they're ready to try this, and it's done in a kind of lab setting, right? So there's, you know, it's in a hospital, you know, there's guides that are trained, that are experienced within using these kind of these medicines. And the idea is that you know, take quite a big dose of, in the cases that I've worked on, psilocybin, so magic mushrooms, the synthetic version, and you're in that experience, this psychedelic state for 6, 7, 8 hours. It's you know, it's a pretty long-term thing. And in that room, you're there, and you basically encourage to wear blindfold and headphones, and the headphones will be playing music. And, you know, in the trial that I worked on, I was tasked with curating the music for that entire like 6, 7, 8 hours. So that was quite a big responsibility. And I felt like it was a really amazing opportunity to be able to do that, because I felt like all of my experiences, and we've talked about quite a lot of them today, have led into me feeling confident enough to be able to deliver on that, you know, because all the stuff around music, science, psychology, curation of music, being able to put myself in other person's shoes, you know, like extrapolating my taste, but maintaining a high quality control level, you know, understanding all the sort of sound therapy aspects of like how music will affect brain and body, you know, these are things that I can able to channel into like this kind of curation process. And it was a fascinating thing to be able to do. And essentially the way that it works is like, you know, they set up the 6 different playlists called phases, and it's everything from the kind of like initial kind of welcome and grounding to like the kind of the ingestion of the drug to then like the you know the onsets kicking in to then the peak, and then the descent after the peak has been hit, and then coming out the other side. So I took sort of research a lot of the different songs that had previously been used in trials, because it's one of those things, and it's again similar to music in my example with music in shops or whatever in commercial spaces. It's just something that everyone does, everywhere plays like music, but like, has anyone really thought about it? And in the psychedelic space, it seems like all these trials are playing music. There was a kind of some studies done like back in the 60s around like, well, we're going to think about a sort of musical methodology to like pick these tracks. And there was a couple of things done, but it was very kind of basic things. Obviously, then prior to that, you have the old musical tradition, you know, the Icaros and the ayahuasca ceremonies and stuff. Like music is a fundamental, the drumming ceremonies, etc., and the iboga thing in Africa and stuff. So music is innately kind of like, you know, an integral part of it. But like, you know, could that then those notions be translated into like a playlist with like contemporary songs or whatever? You know, that's I think the thing that would be great to kind of research more. And there is more and more research. I mean, there's a great company called Wavepass that are focusing on this, Mendo Kalian, and his kind of work has been specifically focused on this kind of like idea of music for psychedelic therapy. And then you have it much more in the cultural space with like people like John Hopkins, like creating music for psychedelic therapy, an album. And anyway, so we delivered the playlist with a bit of technology that allows the playlist to be played in this kind of like arc that was representative of the different phases. And yeah, it, you know, music in that kind of space is known as the hidden therapist. So it's there, it's the accompaniment, it's the kind of like the guide through, you know, what for many people is a transformational, like once in a lifetime experience, like, you know, up there with the most memorable experiences that we'll have in their life. And the way that it works, similarly, I think very similar to, as I've described with the sound therapy thing, in terms of how you know, confront in this kind of held space, you know, your traumas. It's very similar in terms of the principles, which is that in the psychedelic space, you're able to, you know, this whole kind of idea of like ego death occurs and you're one with the world, and you can really kind of start to confront maybe your traumas in this kind of space that you're more safe in, more comfortable in. And then literally like your brain can have an opportunity to kind of rewire itself.
Neurons completely.
Yeah.
In cases, it's been almost immediate.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So the first study I did was with chronic pain sufferers, fibromyalgia. And then the one that I'm just about to mark on now is with gambling addicts. And they showed me some of the fMRI like scans of the gambling addicts. It's amazing. I mean, they had the footballer, Paul Merson, Arsenal player, right? And he had this gambling addiction. Yeah. Which was kind of well known. So they had him on camera and they'd done these brain scans of him and they were showing him all these photographs of like, you know, his family or, you know, football stuff or whatever it was. And then they showed him a photo of like a betting shop, and his brain just like lit up in all these different ways. Whereas you can look at his picture of his wife or his kids or whatever, and it's just like, oh yeah, whatever. This guy. So it was just like, so he was just like, wow, this just shows like how much, like how little control I have as an individual, like over like this behavior that's just like that's been baked into my neurosystem, my brain. And yeah, like that needs serious rewiring. And if the psychedelic can help him kind of obliterate that state and help him to kind of like go back to very neuroplastic state, something that we experience much more in childhood, but as we get older, you know, we become less able to be plastic with the way that our neurons fire, these kind of thought processes and patterns kind of like become solidified or whatever. So this, you know, psychedelic is it's an amazing way to get there. I think you can get there, and the point of my interest is like, can you get there with sound? You know, can you get with sound alone? So you don't need the drug, which was obviously a big decision for people to make if they want to do that. And it's definitely not for everyone, and it's definitely not going to work for everyone. I think the results that they're finding through the trials are that for a lot of people, like you mentioned, it can immediately be a all-time cure, right? They're never going to go back to that addiction or whatever. For some people, there's a relapse, and for some people, it doesn't work at all. But the comparison that they always make in the talks that I've gone to with this stuff is that the alternative is an SSRI, it's an antidepressant or whatever it is, and that's not really doing anything to kind of like solve the issue, right? It's like it's just dampening the feelings that one might have when they're experiencing that trauma, and that's manifesting itself. So yes, there's that whole kind of like thing, and that can be very that can be effective. That can help people manage the pain and the trauma, whatever. But this can be potentially like a one-time solution that can solve it. Again, it's not for everyone, but for the people it works for, fantastic. You know, and if music can help with that, and actually, if music, part of my interest would be to say, can music help in the aftercare of that? So, for example, you know, the way that memory works with music, obviously I mentioned right at the start, which was like my formative memories, as a kid was like always with the soundtrack of music. Since this is such a formative experience for people with, the psychedelic and these psychedelic states, and music is such a crucial part of that. If they were to just play the music, say 6 months on, 12 months on, they're maybe like in the process of relapsing, and you just play the music, they can bring them back, and the brains get
like
back
an
into that state.
It's just like it becomes, because transformation, sometimes you have a trigger for immediate transformation, but some transformation is over time. So you need that kind of guiding through. That music might be an anchor just to keep giving that
memory trigger to bring them back into that place. Yeah.
We're quite programmable, obviously.
Well, that's it.
That's the thing.
Yeah. I mean, this whole idea of like you're not like necessarily like there's no kind of like self-driving it. It's like all these processes that we just are not in control of. Like it's actually driving it.
Amazing. So just to wrap up, Brian, tell us, just share with us a little bit about like what's on the horizon for you at the moment. What's your what's your general direction without sharing sensitive information? Like what's
I think like I'm generally interested in like the place I'm at is about trying to give back a little bit. So giving like opportunities to use sound as a means to help people in different ways. And that could be helping people connect with nature and the natural world. So I've been doing a lot of stuff in this kind of like with Bio-Sonification, the whole kind of concept is. So that's essentially converting the electrical signals that all living things make, the electricity, bioelectricity, and making music from that. So plugging that into a synthesizer and creating soundscapes based on the nature, if it's a plant or fungi or even a human being, like kind of create sounds. So that seems to have been something that's really kind of touched a nerve and hit this kind of cultural zeitgeist as it is right now. And I've been doing projects, with schools, with mental health charities, but also like, just creative projects with different brands and stuff. Obviously we met the WXO and we did a bunch of like mushroom breakfasts there, which is really fun as an experiential thing, where you're literally eating the mushrooms and it's part of your breakfast, but you're hearing the mushrooms play the soundtrack as you're listening, which kind of freaked a few people out. But that connection of the senses is really kind of important. So if I can,
and a connection with nature as well. I mean, that was also something I took from that, to hear like of a mushroom sing almost. It was quite incredible. I was like, oh right, I haven't actually seen that before. But just to know that we're all alive and part of a bigger system here.
Yeah, I think that kind of thing is really important. I mean, what the mushroom is actually saying is the jury is out, right? And it's a relatively kind of controversial subject to touch on, and I'd acknowledge that. But from a kind of creative kind of angle, and this just basic fundamental kind of connection to nature. I mean, I think of myself, I spent like 15 odd years in nightclubs and whatever, or working with commercial spaces with open ear in these built environments, and I had this kind of calling to try and get out of them and into a more natural kind of world, and I think as human beings we've evolved. We haven't evolved necessarily far enough to exist in these kind of cities and these built up environments, these noisy spaces that we've kind of created for ourselves. So the ability to escape into nature through the vehicle of listening is really important for me. And then also from a kind of creative hat on or whatever, is like if I can be inspired by nature, and that could be through its electricity, it could be through whatever means, and then channel that through all my experiences with sound therapy, with the app technologies we built, and experience with music, and that can then help other people, then that's a fantastic sort of space to be. So I'm just looking for the kind of more creative projects to do these kind of this work.
Amazing. Well, look, Brian, thank you for hosting us first and foremost. Thank you for inviting us into your studio, into your space. I mean, amazing. Thank you for joining the show. It's been brilliant. I think just to really, learn about your journey and the importance of just sound, period. So I love that you bring this kind of your perspective, your experience, your knowledge, and share it out to the audience, because I think there's a lot of people listening that don't probably appreciate it as much. And I hope even if it was just for a day, to be a little bit more aware of sound in their life on their everyday, I think that would be amazing.
Yeah.
You've done a good job.
Thanks very much.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.